Consider yourself lucky. If you're watching this, you most likely not only live in a society blessed by a functioning legal system, you also probably live in a society in which that system makes an attempt to fairly and efficiently deliver justice, especially in the case of capital punishment. For most of history, rather than capital punishment being focused on ending life, it was focused on drawing it out long enough that the victim would be put through as much hell on earth as possible. I'm Mike with List 25, and in order to help you count your blessings, I'm bringing you 25 of humanity's most brutal methods of execution.
Woo! We're getting light again.
And no, watching this list is not one of them. Shut your mouths. Scaphism. An ancient Persian method of execution where a person is stripped naked and placed in a tree trunk with only the head, hands, and feet protruding. They are then force-fed milk and honey until they develop a severe case of diarrhea. All of their exposed skin would then be covered in honey to attract insects while they were left floating in a stagnant pond. As the person's feces accumulated, the insects it attracted would begin to eat and breed within his or her skin, which would become increasingly gangrenous. Death could take over 2 weeks and was likely the result of starvation, dehydration, and shock. 24. Guillotine. Conceived in the late 1700s, this was one of the first methods of execution created under the assumption that capital punishment was intended to end life rather than inflict pain. Although it was specifically invented as a humane form of execution, it's been outlawed in France, and the last one was in 1977.
Bring back the guillotine!
I was going to say that Star Wars was actually in theaters when the guillotine was stopped.
Guillotine is like my favorite method of execution.
I don't have a favorite. That's weird. That's on you.
That's fine.
That says a lot.
Maybe a little bit.
You know what my favorite form of execution is?
What?
Tickling them. Not until they die. Just hugs. 23. Republican marriage. A strange form of execution allegedly practiced in France. It involved the tying of a man and woman together and then both of them being thrown in a river to drown. 22. Cement shoes. A method of execution preferred by the American Mafia, it was similar to the Republican marriage in that it involved drowning, but instead of being tied to someone of the opposite gender, your feet were placed in cement blocks.
Want to see some more outrageous shoes?
Click here.
Maybe.
I'll add it.
Okay.
I'll make it a card.
Yeah.
21. Execution by elephant. Employed heavily in Southeast Asia, the elephants were often trained to prolong the death of the victim. Many times this method was used in order to show that the ruler is even in command of nature.
Badass.
20. Walking the plank. You're probably getting tired of people being thrown into water, but this form of execution many times ended a little differently from the previous two. Mainly practiced by pirates and rogue seafarers, the victim often didn't even have time to drown before they were dealt with by the sharks that tended to follow the ships. Arr. 19. Bestiari. Bestiari is a reference to those who would combat beasts in the days of ancient Rome. Although sometimes the act was voluntary and performed for money or recognition, many times the bestiari were political prisoners sent into the arena naked and unable to defend themselves. 18. Mazzello. Named after the implement used in the execution, usually a mallet, this method of capital punishment was popular in the Papal States during the 18th century. The condemned would be led to a scaffold in a public square with nothing more than the executioner and a coffin. The executioner would then raise the mallet and bring it down on the head of the victim. Because this would typically only lead to them being stunned, their throat was usually slit right after. 17. Upright jerker. Having originated in the United States, this method of capital punishment is now often employed in countries like Iran. Although it's very similar to hanging, rather than the victim being dropped through a trap door to sever the spinal cord, they're violently jerked upward, typically by a crane. 16. Sawing. Allegedly practiced in parts of Europe and Asia, it involved the victim being inverted and then sawn in half, starting at the groin. Due to being upside down, the brain would receive enough blood to keep the person conscious until the large vessels of the abdomen were severed.
Neat.
Sure. 15. Flaying. The act of removing a person's skin from their body, this form of execution was often used in order to stir up fear, as the skin would typically be nailed in a public place for all to see.
I really thought that said flying. This is not flying.
No.
This is killing.
I mean,
with style.
I'm sure their skin was flying in the wind after that.
No. Stop. Delete. No, what the hell? I'm keeping all of that.
14. Blood Eagle. Spoken of in Nordic sagas, the Blood Eagle involved cutting the ribs of the victim by the spine, breaking them so they resembled wings, and then pulling the victim's lungs out through the opening. Salt would then be sprinkled on the wound. Salt the wounds!
That gives a whole new meaning to putting salt in the wound.
That's a reference if anyone gets that.
To salt in the wound?
No, the way I said it. Salt the wounds!
Oh.
13. The gridiron. Essentially broiling the victim over a bed of hot coals, the first burning method on our list was terribly cruel, and the death was not a quick one. 12. Crushing. Although we've already seen this method employed by means of elephants, there is so much more to be said here. Crushing was typically used in Europe or America in order to extract a plea from a victim. Every time the victim refused, more weight was added to their chest until fatal suffocation would occur. This one was Salem witch trials.
Yeah.
Giles Corey, I believe.
Yeah, more weight.
More weight.
More weight.
11. Breaking wheel. Also known as the Catherine wheel, the victim would be tied to it and then spun while the executioner delivered bone-shattering blows to their body. Sometimes the victim's appendages would then be woven through the spokes of the wheel, and they would be placed on display for all to see. I'm glad we have better entertainment these days. 10. The Spanish tickler. Also known as the cat's paw, not the cat's meow, this device was used by the executioner to rip and tear skin off the victim. Oftentimes, death would not occur immediately, but rather as a result of infection setting into the wounds.
There are two very misleading titles there. Tickling and the cat's paw. They both sound so sweet.
Well, I mean, cats have those nasty claws, and
I have cats.
I know. You should try this one.
I love my cats.
I know. 9. Burning at the stake. A historically popular method of capital punishment. If the victim were lucky, he or she would be executed along with several others. This would ensure that the flame is much bigger and lead to death by carbon monoxide poisoning rather than actual burning. 8. Bamboo. An extremely slow and painful punishment used in Asia, the victim was tied down over several bamboo shoots. Because bamboo grows so fast, up to 1 foot per day, it would penetrate directly through the victim's body, slowly impaling them. 7. Premature burial. Somewhat self-explanatory, this technique has been used by governments throughout history to execute condemned prisoners. One of the latest documented cases was during the Nanking Massacre in 1937, when Japanese troops buried Chinese civilians alive. 6. Ling Chi. Also known as death by slow cutting or the lingering death, this form of execution was finally outlawed in China at the turn of the 20th century. It involved pieces of the victim's body being slowly and methodically removed while the executioner tried to keep him or her alive for as long as possible. 5. Seppuku. Practiced by samurai, seppuku was a form of ritualistic suicide that allowed the warrior to die honorably. Essentially, he would disembowel himself, and in an ideal situation, there would be a close friend standing by ready to behead him as soon as his guts began to spill.
What a bro.
4. Brazen Bull. Not only inhumane, the bull was deliberately created for the enjoyment of the executioner and the onlookers. First proposed to the tyrant of Acragas in Sicily by the metalworker Prilos, the bull was designed to be big enough for one person to fit inside. After a fire was lit below, the person would slowly burn to death. The head of the bull, however, was designed to acoustically convert their screams into bull sounds, and the smoke from their burning body would be expelled through its nose. 3. Colombian necktie. Employed heavily in Colombia, go figure, and the rest of Latin America by drug cartels, I spared you the picture on this one. It involved cutting open the victim's throat and then pulling his or her tongue out through the opening. Usually the body was left as a warning to others. 2. Crucifixion. A particularly brutal method of execution practiced primarily by the Romans, it was intended to be as slow, painful, and humiliating as possible. Usually after a prolonged period of beating or torture, the victim was forced to carry his own cross to the location of his death. Afterwards, they were either nailed or tied to the cross, where they would hang sometimes for several weeks. Death, when it did come, usually came by suffocation as the victim could no longer hold themselves up to breathe. 1. Hanged, drawn, and quartered. Used mainly in England, it's widely considered to be one of the most brutal forms of execution ever devised. As the name implies, it came in 3 parts. In the first, the victim was tied to a wooden frame and dragged to the location of their execution, drawn. They were then hung until nearly dead, hanged. Immediately after being taken down, their abdomen was opened and their entrails were removed. As the victim watched, he was then burned before his eyes. He was then also emasculated and eventually beheaded. After all of this, his body was divided into 4 parts, quartered, and placed in various locations around England as a public crime deterrent. This punishment was only used on men, for any convicted women would generally be burnt at the stake as a matter of decency. I actually didn't write a question for this one.
Okay.
So, what's your favorite form of execution?
Exactly.
Oh my god.
So, what's your favorite method of execution? Let us know in the comments below or tweet your answer to us at List25.
Oh, you were way too excited about execution.
You know, execution, like, I love execution scenes in movies. They're just so...
Future Tristan, cut it off so he just says, I love execution.
Yeah, future Tristan's gonna listen to you about this.
He might.
Well, you know, maybe.
I know.
Well, yeah, I also do like a good execution. I've studied executions, like, a lot. They fascinate me for whatever reason. Remember the other day on the live stream?
Don't execute kids, people. Wait, don't execute people, kids.
Don't execute kids, people.
Also, don't execute kids.
Like, they're criminals, so it's okay.
Not always.
Well, I don't know. I don't know. It's falling apart. I'm looking kind of evil here.
You know who wasn't a criminal?
Wait.
Jesus. You just called Jesus a criminal.
Ah, man.
So that's right, I'm Jewish.
Well, actually, I'm not really a fan of crucifixion.
Oh, good. Good.
I said, the guillotine
how many
is like...
stars would you rank it out of 5?
Probably 0.
Oh, great.
The guillotine is where it was at.
Oh, sure.
Yeah.
That was a good scene in Pirates of the Caribbean.
Oh, yeah.
I think that was...
The Tizakine.
I think, yeah. That was a good one.
Mm-hmm. It was funny.
That was the last one. That was the latest one, right?
Yeah, dead men tell no tales.
Yep.
They don't indeed.
I hope they don't.
But yeah, turns out the guillotine is actually very quick. It's not drawn out at all.
I mean, unless someone lowers it really slowly.
No, I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about, like, it was very quick. They were there, boom, pop, over. There was no build-up or anything.
Yeah, because they had a line of people to execute.
Yeah. The Reign of Terror.
God.
Mm-hmm.
This is awful.
Yeah, a little bit. We've now spent at least 2 minutes talking about Tristan's love of execution. I should be sent to a psych ward.
I want to go home.
Well, we got 4 more lists. Oh boy. So yeah, let us know in the comments below. Or tweet your answer to us at list25. My character on the show has just slowly gone off the deep end.
What character?
I don't know, whatever character I had to begin with. He's
What
just
character?
got more and more insane.
What show? What are you talking about?
Oh, this is like even making me even more insane. Whew.
Tristan on list 25? What character?
Well, it's a little bit of a character. Cut to whatever we go to after this. Future Tristan, do it.
Enjoying our lists? Be sure to click that subscribe button on the bottom right and the notification bell so you don't miss out on new ones every Monday through Friday. Share them with friends and help us consistently conciliate curiosity. And if you want even more lists, check out these videos here or just head to our website at list25.com.